There are so many models now. There's GPT 5.6, which is 3 models within a model. There's Fable and the Opus series, Grok 4.5, and a bunch of other open weight models. If you're feeling the model comparison fatigue, I totally feel you. But this is a model comparison video, dang it, because I've been using Grok, Claude, and Codex for a number of weeks now. Hopefully this video will save you a bit of time in understanding what models fit into which boxes, and also discussing the strengths and weaknesses so you can make the right decision before you want to spend your hundreds of dollars. So let's break down the major buckets you might put your tasks in when you're evaluating coding agents. The first obvious one is interactive agents, which would be something like running Claude directly from the CLI or Codex directly from the CLI, or using IDEs like Cursor or Warp. And the second category is anything that's automated, usually in a cloud sandbox, maybe automated locally as well. And these are going to be things like GitHub action triggers or cron jobs. And within interactive agents, I would have a few sub buckets as well, like unscoped work versus scoped work. Scoped work is anything where you already know the requirements when you're sending off that initial prompt. And these are going to be tasks like migrating architecture from one style to another, or fixing a bug report that has something that you can test against. You might also think of these as goal-oriented tasks if you've ever seen the /goal skill in Claude or Codex. This is what we're talking about. You're hill climbing from where you're at to a testable solution. And then there's unscoped tasks, where you don't quite know what success looks like, but you do want to work with an agent to figure out what that is. An obvious one is build a landing page and give me a few options to evaluate, or prototyping a solution that does something, maybe not perfectly, but at least gets the vibes right so you don't have to fill in the details. And then there's cloud automations, which usually falls into the scoped bucket as well. And there's a few like sub-examples that we could enumerate, like code review. This is the most common one. You might even use an external service for this. I personally like to roll my own code review agent. I have a video about that. This could also be something like triaging a task board and filling in details, or it could even be an implementation agent that takes something on a task board and turns it into a scoped solution. And then there's other areas that I personally haven't explored, like weekly architecture reviews. These are going to be more unscoped, but out of the scope of this video. And within these buckets, I would say there's a few categories that you want to think about. The first one is going to be cost. So thinking about how many tokens is this going to cost me? And if you're getting by on subscription plans, how does that relate to the subscription maximums on Claude, Codex, or Grok? They're all very different. There's also, of course, intelligence, which to me means can it get to a working solution without extra prompting? And the last one is the most cringe of the bunch, which is taste. This goes a little bit beyond did it get it right, but also did it kind of fill in the gaps in your requirements? In other words, unscoped work. And come up with some options that are maybe more creative than what you would come up with yourself. This could also mean the model's more adversarial and asks you questions or challenges your thinking. But it can also mean like a visual design context. Does it have good taste? So now let's evaluate our models against all of these metrics to figure out where they fit, starting with Fable. Now to give you the answers on this, I'm not going to be going to benchmarks, I'm going to be going to my own usage. So this is a beautifully slop-coded summary of the conversations I've had to understand the real-world spend that I've been experiencing across each of these, courtesy of Grok 4.5. Thank you for building this beautiful visualizer. So inside of here, I had it pull out some of the top sample conversations and evaluate both the token cost and also some highlights in the conversation itself to talk about where it excelled. And because I want to talk about cost first, I'll actually scroll down to the bottom here where we can see a cost snapshot of some of the sessions that I've run. But we can see a comparison between Claude Fable and GPT 5.6 Sol. These are the two frontier models if you're reading the headlines right now. And you'll immediately notice off to the side a little bit of a difference in the cost that you observe. Now you can go to the benchmarks to see on average what these are. This is, of course, my own anecdotal snapshot. But we can see that the most expensive run I've ever done by far was using Claude Fable, and this cost on the order of $400. I didn't actually spend that. Of course, it's subsidized through the Claude subscription for however long they're letting us do that for. And this second one, which honestly wasn't a super intensive conversation, still cost me around $76. And then down here, we have our breakdown for GPT 5.6 as a point of comparison. And we can see for a very meaty task, which was migrating my entire code base to the React compiler, it spent less than a mid-sized conversation with Fable, which is pretty wild. And you also notice, even in this conversation, it handed off to Codex for certain parts of the implementation. So this isn't even the full cost of what was going on there. But for just a scoped implementation, it cost me a lot less money on Sol. And we can see a deeper comparison here that's into the $20 range. And this falls in line with what you have probably seen across other tools, where even if you're holding Fable in the right way, or you're having it delegate to other models to save cost, it's always going to be on the top of the hill when it comes to that. And then we get to intelligence and taste. So these are going to be more subjective. And for that, I'll just show you some example conversations that I've had. The first one was here, where I was evaluating a PR on the terminal button inside of this Notes app right here. By the way, it's called Hubble, and you should totally try it out. It lets you render HTML visualizations inside your Notes app, and it also has a built-in terminal, so if you want to talk to an agent while you're writing notes, you can do that. How cool. And this was submitted by an open source contributor, and I was evaluating their PR at the time, and I noticed that the toggle button wasn't super well styled. This is the one that we landed on, but the previous version was a lot larger, and it didn't really feel right to me. I was also trying to figure out how to implement this chat about this note feature, evaluating the right keyboard shortcuts, right iconography, etc. And this is where Fable's really good. So I gave it a simple ask of, why does it feel off, you know? And it gave me a nice answer here, where the boxed icon was making it visually heavier than everything inside of it, and so it would swap over to terminal line. And it also gave another comment about the empty state that I hadn't even considered. But I realized, you're right, we could probably make that empty state a lot better. This is what I mean by taste, where you ask a question and it teases out the real reason that you're asking for something. This is something I've never seen the Codex or Grok series of models do. It's something that Fable is uniquely good at. And so it's why, whenever I have a question about design or about the feel of something, Fable is a really great go-to. And so I mark it pretty high on the taste spectrum. It honestly might be the most tasteful model that you will find. And then there's intelligence. This is not one that I can measure easily through my own anecdotes, so I will point you to the artificial analysis bench. And you can see right now, this is a pretty clear win for Claude Fable 5 across a lot of benchmarks that you are seeing. Another example is here, where I gave it a pretty vague brainstorming idea of how can we pre-fill the file that needs to be worked on whenever you open that side menu. This is this button right here, where you can hit chat about this note, and it has it pre-filled with whatever note you need to track. And it came up with this really clever idea of creating an environment variable with the file name, and then pre-injecting the prompt directly in here, and letting the user configure it if they want to. So over here, this is an editable setting, where every time you say, I want to chat with this note and do something, it sets the environment variable, and it also passes it to the CLI. I thought this was an absolutely brilliant idea. It's not one that I came up with myself. And it was able to implement it and also come up with the thought without me prompting it. And so because of that, I feel like it's also blending in the intelligence quite a lot as well. Now, the second one I want to talk about is GPT 5.6. This is the other frontier model that you've been hearing a lot about. Maybe you've been given a lot of resets as well on your Codex subscription and you're ready to go use them. Well, how does it stack up against Fable, in my opinion? Well, first off, the cost efficiency of this model is a lot higher than Fable. It's very impressive, the amount of intelligence that you get relative to the cost efficiency. And that's not to mention the amount of subsidization these companies are willing to do. So I've been very impressed using GPT 5.6 from a cost efficiency standpoint. It's not perfect, but it's pretty freaking good. And then when it comes to the intelligence and taste levels, I have found that GPT 5.6 is really impressive at implementing things. I might even treat it as just a touch above Fable when it comes to implementing something end-to-end. For example, heading over here, this was the task I mentioned earlier, having it migrate my entire code base to the React compiler. This is where I used /goal. What I mentioned earlier is a way to have a model hill climb to a solution where the tests are super well defined. I had it do that. And I said the goal is to make sure that everything is written according to the React compiler recommendations, removing stuff from the code base like use memo and use callback. and also ensuring the test suites still pass and that you've clicked around every major feature using computer use. It's very impressive at doing this sort of thing. And again, on a very low token budget. I used high reasoning here. I did not kick it down. And I was still able to get this whole thing done at cheaper than a regular Fable conversation. And throughout this, I brought more things into scope as we were talking. Like, it did such a good job, why not migrate the whole web version of the app too, not just the desktop version? And at the end of it, it just frickin' worked. Everything worked exactly as I expected. I did my own click arounds, but it also has access to computer use if you're using Codex, which means it's more effective at testing things end to end. Claude doesn't have the same level of computer use capabilities as Codex does. And all of that speaks to just having a very intelligent model. Now, the problem on the flip side of this is the amount of taste that this model has. Now, I've noticed it has been improving over time. If I were talking about the old series, like 5.5, I would put taste somewhere like here-ish. It takes your ideas very literally. It's not super creative, and that can sometimes bite you. And I would say 5.6 has improved, but it's not excellent. We actually have an example of that right here, where I noticed that it did its entire migration, but at the end of it, there were still examples of where it didn't migrate. And that's because I had a shared UI package used by the web and desktop that it didn't migrate because it said, oh, well, when you told me to migrate the desktop app, you didn't tell me to migrate other packages that the desktop app uses. And I thought, well, I mean, no, but it's kind of implied. If I'm telling you to migrate the desktop app, you should also probably migrate the components used by that desktop app. I feel like this is something that Fable would have picked up on and at least asked me, do I want to include these packages as well? But GPT said, I'm going to take you literally at face value, and I'm not going to migrate those other things. And so because of that, man, it's smart, but it doesn't quite have the taste of something like Fable. Now, the last model that I'm going to talk about in here is Grok 4.5. This is a model you may not be trying as much because it's not frontier level if you look at benchmarks immediately, but trust me, this thing is surprisingly impressive. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is token efficiency. And if you thought GPT was efficient, Grok is the king of efficiency, at least compared to anything frontier level. So going back to artificial analysis, this is playing out in my experience. It's not quite as smart as the big guys, but man, it is smart. But the more impressive metrics are on speed and cost per task. Where the token output is super fast. It's in the company of lighter weight, more like open source models. The closest is 5.6 max, which is much slower than 4.5. This matches my experience. And also cost per task is where it gets wild. So we can see here, yeah, Fable is a super expensive model. We get it. And GPT is a lot more efficient. But going down to Grok, it is like really, really impressive what it's able to do. It's even cheaper than the next popular open weight model, which is GLM 5.2. It's really, really efficient and really fast. So heading back to this chart, I would say that the intelligence is pretty freaking high. Not as impressive as like super frontier stuff, but it's high. And the taste is also pretty impressive as well. Zooming out, it's almost a blend of these previous two models into a new one. If you took kind of like 20% of Fable's vibes and you mixed it with 70 or 80% of GPT's like efficiency at getting things done, you would end up with the cocktail that is Grok 4.5. And I'll show you a couple examples of where this plays out. I've been applying it to all sorts of like edge tasks and decently scoped tasks on my machine. For example, I asked it to debug something inside of my bash commands just to sort of kick the tires. And I was really impressed with how it diagnosed the issue. It wrote a bash script that was absolutely perfect for what I was trying to do. And it did all of it on 1.6 credits. So this is using Warp's system, but this is on the magnitude of spending like 5 cents, where if you asked Opus for the same task, it would be like 50 cents to $1. And then I ratcheted it up a little bit, where I had it debug something going wrong in my automated workflows. And again, it did a really great job, although it does have some of the problems that I've noticed with Codex baked into this. First off, the fact that it tends to overfit on any feedback that you give it. Like if you tell it, just make this one change, it will make that change, but also leave backwards compatibility to the previous thing that wasn't quite what you wanted. So I tend to tell it you have overfitted when I start expanding to deeper coding tasks, but it is at least able to get the gist. So I've written up a skill that just tells it simplify and reduce code comments. And I even said just do it again. Because why not optimize it further and further? And at the end, we did end up with a solution that I was happy with, again, at a really efficient token cost. So it's not the most intelligent model. It's not quite frontier, but it is very fast and token efficient. And the code that it does write, while it can be verbose, is good quality. And the last thing I had it work with me on was using it to write out a plan. I was pleasantly surprised by this run, where I'd been using Fable as my planning partner for so long, and Grok came in and honestly crushed it. It's a really great planning partner, and I was very surprised by this. This is what I mean by saying Grok has a little bit of taste built into it, where it can ask you questions that actually expose gaps in your thinking. So here I'm using the Grill Me skill from Matt Pocock. You hear me talk about it on this channel all the time. It's great. It's a simple skill that tells the model to relentlessly ask you questions until you've landed on the approach that you want to do. And here's some examples of where I actually steered it during the discussion, and I ran into some really great takeaways. Where I wasn't too verbose in answering this, here I was implementing backwards and forwards navigation in an app. It gave me just enough text snippets to actually understand what's going on. And it gave me some refinements on what I was asking about that made it easier to work through all of this stuff. So for code, I would give it like a B-, and for planning, especially on a budget, I would give it an A. So heading back over to this sort of matrix, how does this inform where all of these models shine? Well, this is where we can just match up our graphs to decide where to deploy everything. For unscoped work, I would probably say that Fable is a really great match whenever you're doing something that requires a lot of options and things weighed out. It's not a perfect match, as you can see. Depending on your requirements, you might switch this over to Opus or even Sonnet, depending on just the scope of it and how much coding is going to be involved, or how much the cost, intelligence, and taste fluctuates in your day-to-day. But the Claude series is really good in this context. As for scoped work, it comes as no surprise that GPT 5.6 is an absolute winner here. It matches up with the requirements almost exactly. It's super cost efficient and intelligent at getting things done. Although you could also argue that Grok is a really good choice in this arena too. If you really care about cost efficiency and intelligence, I would throw it in there. Otherwise, 5.6 Sol would be a good pick. And the final one on cloud runners, this is where I feel like Grok is the best freaking match. Because I've been doing this more and more recently, wanting to build out my own workflows to triage issues as they come into my open source projects, to handle code review on the other end, and to implement things that are well scoped. All of this speaks to using something that is token efficient and runs on the cloud without too much trouble. And Grok is a really great way to do that. Didn't even talk about cost, by the way. I only talked about token efficiency. But if you're using Twitter Premium, you actually get free credits that can take you a decent distance on your weekly limits. I'm personally on the $40 a month plan, and I'm using it to drive all of my cloud automations and all of my general purpose work around the terminal and around my computer. And it's great at that. Honestly, I don't even hit 50% of my limits. I could see if you're in like a cost efficiency zone, that just spending $40 a month on Grok and applying it to pretty much all the problems is a good idea. It might be worth trying out just because of the balance that it gives you. But if you're in an area where you can deploy the best models for every task, say you're working on a team and you have a shared token budget, then this is the split that I would probably do. Now, one more dark horse that I might throw into this guy is a pattern that I've been seeing around the community to combine the two frontier models to do tasks together. And this is a pattern where you might have an orchestration agent like Fable that takes in all of your asks, and then it delegates to the most efficient model to do whatever task that you need to do. Like it might decide, I'm going to implement some of the code using GPT 5.6, and maybe I'm using Sonnet 5 to brainstorm some front-end design options since it's better at unscoped work. And by using a split like this, you might be able to increase the cost efficiency without sacrificing too much on intelligence and taste. This is more of an emergent pattern that I did try and had maybe mixed success with. So the skill that I use for this is authored by Theo of Obsidian fame, I think. And it's just a blurb that you can add to your Claude MD to instruct Fable to delegate to sub-agents. And this is an opinionated table that's a little bit out of date. I need to use GPT 5.6. I was testing on 5.5 when I tried this out. And it's just informing the agent of how cost, intelligence, and taste break down across each of these models so that it can decide what to delegate to. So for example, if it's doing a task that's very well scoped, migrating to the React compiler, I don't know, it would go to this chart and see that 5.5 is very cost efficient because of its subscriptions and tokens, as we mentioned, and also very intelligent. And yes, its taste is a little bit less, but if you give it the right product requirements, it can get things done. And it also weighs out some of the comparisons to Sonnet and Opus, which are common delegation targets as well. And each of those have different breakdowns of cost and intelligence. And you might tweak these based on your own experiences. This is just one random influencer's idea of things, but I happen to align with it as well. And I was able to get it to work if I explicitly told the model to start delegating. In this case, I actually told it what to delegate to. In other cases, I just say, I want you to do this work and delegate. Like I just end my prompt with that in order to enter this sub-agent mode. So both of these runs, the $76 one and this $400 run, it did use delegation and it still did cost me a lot. So I would try this out on a lot more experiments and perhaps benchmark it before I really bet on this idea. But it is an interesting thought experiment of, through delegation, we might be able to get a mixture of minds. And at the very least, it can increase code quality. Because if you have Fable look at the way the code's authored and GPT implement it for you, you might end up with really high quality solutions. Whew, so I hope that was helpful. I know that we broke down a lot inside of here, and I don't blame you if you walk away from this thinking, I'm just gonna stick with my Claude subscription and move on. But I do think as teams start to evaluate where they should be deploying their tokens to get the most performance per dollar, these comparisons are gonna become more and more important. And if you're an individual user that's looking for the best bang for your buck, honestly, just use Grok on $40 a month and see how you like it. With that, I hope this was useful to you. We have a lot more coding content coming soon. See you in the next one.